Welcome to BizTech's CEO Conversation Show. Today we have Kenneth Worsdale, CEO of Extra Space Asia. Extra Space Asia is a pioneer in the self-storage industry in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, interestingly enough, the global self-storage market is expected to reach 74.8 billion in 2028. And the self-storage industry has today in the US alone 39.5 billion in annual revenue. And Kenneth is going to give us insights into the market in the Asia Pacific region. Kenneth, welcome to the show.
Great, Brian. Thank you. It's good to be here with you.
Now, Kenneth, for the start, could you give us an overview of Extra Space and its history?
All right. Extra Space was founded in Singapore in 2007. So we're just over 15 years old. We now have close on 80 facilities throughout Asia, across 6 countries, in Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan, and Korea. We are one of the leading self-storage operators. We have, fortunately, got into the industry at a time when self-storage in Asia is becoming very well accepted and very well demanded. In the United States, almost 10% of households use self-storage. In Asia, it is well below 1%. So we see a lot of potential for ourselves in growing the industry in Asia. And over the last 15 years, we've really seen that happen. I mean, it's really taken off. And in Singapore, it is very well accepted amongst people. In Japan, it is as well. Malaysia is still a growing market where we are having to educate people as to what self-storage is. And it's always difficult, Brian, to sell something to somebody when they don't know that they need it. So
Absolutely.
Our job is to always make sure people understand and learn what self-storage is, how it can change their lives, how it can make their lives a lot more simple, decluttered, living at home in a much cleaner environment. So that is our challenge in Malaysia still, is getting the general population to understand what self-storage is.
And really, Kenneth, the whole self-storage industry across the Asia Pacific is really fueled by a couple of key changes, isn't it? Namely, urban immigration, more compact living spaces, which is why you've obviously started in Singapore and done very well in Singapore,
Yes.
and also, of course, of setting up of new households, so renting over owning. So a lot of young people going out and they don't have spaces to store their products, isn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I think, people throughout Asia have been migrating from the countryside into cities. They're living in much smaller condominiums houses than they used to. But at the same time, with the affluence in Asia, especially amongst young people, they're buying more and more things, but they're not living in bigger and bigger homes. So they need somewhere to put all of their items. So we, for instance, have a storer who's got 6 sets of golf clubs with us. I think it got to the point where his wife probably said, get the golf clubs out of the house, put them somewhere else. Most people don't have golf clubs. A lot will have 1 set, but when you have 6 sets and you're living in a relatively small condominium, there's nowhere to put them. So it really is a lifestyle change for people. I think COVID has really educated people as well that spending time at home and enjoying your home is actually very enjoyable. And so during COVID, a lot of people decluttered their homes. They were working from home potentially. So husband needed space, wife needed space, the kids needed space to study, and they just had too much stuff in their home. So that's when they approached storage or self-storage companies like Extra Space Asia and said, what can we do? Where can we put our items so that our homes are clean? But at the same time, we want the accessibility to get hold of those items should we want them.
Okay, so Kenneth, this is interesting. Now, so COVID obviously has fueled growth in your industry. Walk us through some of the numbers that perhaps Extra Space experienced in terms of growth over the last couple of years.
We, as I said, over the last 10 years, we've gone from 7 facilities in Asia to almost 80 facilities now. Some of that happened during COVID, where we'd actually started opening up new facilities or acquiring properties immediately before COVID. COVID came along and the demand really skyrocketed. And it skyrocketed from a lot of different sectors of the population. Individuals, families wanting to clean up their homes, small businesses that were tentatively going out of business and were shutting down because of COVID, but they also didn't want to throw away the items that they had. If they had an office with furniture in it, they didn't want to throw the furniture away, hoping that business would come back. So they put it in self-storage. People put excess inventories in self-storage. So COVID really changed a lot of the way people live at home in particular. And it is something that, obviously when COVID started winding down, those of us in the industry were worried that are people now going to start taking all their items back home and the demand for self-storage is going to decline. That did not happen. People just got used to that lifestyle that everything at home was decluttered and they like it. So they've stayed with it.
Okay, that's really an interesting insight. Now, because people didn't go back to their previous behavior had been modified. Now, give us a sense, therefore, that you've got 3 business lines in terms of personal storage, business storage, and then you have also wine storage. Walk us through each of those individual segments and how that has grown across the region.
It's grown in all 3 sectors. We have wine storage, for instance, in Malaysia, Singapore, and Taiwan. A lot of people, again, as affluence comes to Asia, are collecting wines, collecting for investment or collecting to use. Asia is not a great place to be keeping expensive bottles of wine at home, because wine has got to be kept in a very consistent temperature and a humidity level. So, keeping 6, 12 bottles at home, you can do it, but when you start collecting wines, you cannot. So our wine business has really grown absolutely phenomenally, just because people have found out, wow, I can buy 10, 12 cases of wine, I can put them in Extra Space, everything is stored correctly, and when I take them out in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, they will still be in great condition. So wine storage has really taken off. The business storage at the same time is also increasing. With e-commerce businesses, a lot of small startups, they buy inventory. They really do not want to go out and rent a warehouse space where they've got to sign a lease for 2 years. They've potentially got to put in air conditioning. They've got to put in Wi-Fi, utility hookup, telephone lines, etc. It's far easier to go to Extra Space and rent a storage unit and put my items in there. Everything is provided. All I've got to do as the storer is have a lock to lock up my unit. I don't need to do anything else. When my inventory shrinks or increases and I need more space or less space, all I do is go to the reception and say, I want to downsize my unit from 100 square feet to 50 square feet, or I want to upsize from 50 to 100. So they want all of that flexibility. So a lot of these small startup companies have started using self-storage rather than going the traditional route of, renting a warehouse, signing a 2-year lease, being committed, etc.
So Kenneth, then obviously, as all the industry trends point towards growth, where are you seeing growth for Extra Space in the coming years?
Wow, that's a tough one, Brian, because it's a little bit like everywhere. Certainly in the cities, not in the countrysides. I don't think there's really one country in Asia that I would say will not have self-storage growth potential. Some will have more. Japan is growing very quickly at the moment, although it was one of the much more developed markets. Singapore continues to grow. And I think, the sort of newer countries in Asia where the economies are still growing and taking off, like a sort of Vietnam, self-storage will come to them as well. They see it. I mean, they hear about it, they read it. When they travel, they experience it. So I honestly think it's fair to say self-storage will come to everywhere in Asia if it isn't already there.
Now, Kenneth, in terms of extra space, one of the things as I was researching this interview that I thought about in terms of growth opportunities was the fact that with rising affluence, as you mentioned earlier in the interview, you went into the wine business because really there was a very compelling value proposition.
Yeah.
Are you perhaps also looking at storage for collectible cars? Which
Correct.
really, again, that's a very long-term lucrative business that isn't a big business in Asia.
Correct. We Brian, we sort of have looked at cars. We've looked at motorbikes. There is a demand. We just haven't gone into that segment yet. We have in Taiwan set up motorbike storage in some of our facilities where people who have the more expensive motorbikes don't want to leave them on the streets. They may also not ride that motorbike every day, but they want somewhere safe that they can put that motorbike, perhaps have a set of tools with them so they can work on the bike, and they put it in self-storage. And they know it's safe, it's climate controlled, they can access it whenever they want, and it's not sitting out on the street for someone to tamper with. So cars, yes. I mean, there is a demand for cars. It's a little more limited. I think it's not enormous, but there is a demand.
Now, looking ahead now, traditionally the self-storage business globally, your profit margins are nice and juicy. It's traditionally around 41%. How does it look like in Asia?
It varies, Brian. There's two operating models in Asia for self-storage. Companies that buy the properties and companies that lease properties. And then many companies like ourselves do both. We have some purchase properties and some lease properties. That really depends on the economics within that country. Taiwan and Hong Kong tend to be leased self-storage facilities. Japan owned self-storage facilities. Singapore, a mixture. Korea, a mixture. Malaysia, a mixture as well. So there really isn't one fixed model, and obviously your margins are very different. If you lease, your margins are lower. If you own, your margins are higher. But then you have all the capex expenditure. When you own, you've got to repair the elevators, you've got to service the elevators. Whereas if you lease, that's the landlord's responsibility. I think self-storage has been very good and will continue to be. I'm not sure it is as good sometimes as the media and investors make out, because there are challenges in it. One of the challenges that all of us face when you open up a new facility, say 50,000 square feet, that facility does not rent up in 1 or 2 months. It's not like you can turn on a spigot in a manufacturing facility and you're at full capacity. It ramps up. So the first month you rent 1,000 feet. The next month you rent 2,000. The third month you rent 1,000 square feet again, but 500 square feet have moved out because they no longer need self-storage. So there is this sort of relatively slow ramp up in self-storage, which is why a number of companies tend to go with smaller self-storage facilities, because you can obviously fill them up and reach high occupancy in a much shorter period of time. But if one has the staying power, there's more money to be made in sort of larger facilities, because when they're up and running, a lot of your expenses are amortized. Your staff on site, whether you're 100,000 square foot facility or 20, you still only need 2 or 3 people. That doesn't change. So a lot of those costs get sort of spread out over a much larger base. The margins are good, but there are a lot of expenses as well that one incurs. It's not all margin.
Then Kenneth, then you're a successful business. You're a multiple award winner in Singapore. What's next for the business? Is strategically more acquisitions ahead? Are you thinking of taking the business forward in terms of an IPO?
Yeah, the immediate goals, Brian, are to solidify our positions in the 6 markets we're in. That I think is very important. So we've really got to make sure in those 6 markets, we're number 1, we're leading the show, we're driving the industry. Then looking throughout Asia, there will be expansion into other countries within Asia. So we're certainly looking at that. You get, Australia, New Zealand are markets as well that are not that far away from Asia. So we're certainly keeping our eyes open. We tend to be quite opportunistic. In other words, you can't always set exactly what's going to happen down. You wait for something to happen and then you react. So, we're very opportunistic. The growth, because the company sold just over a year ago to a Dutch pension fund, and then to the APG and Capital Land. And under our 2 new shareholders, obviously the direction, the strategic vision is to grow the business significantly. Where that goes, whether it's IPO or REITs, I'm not in a position to sort of say at the present time.
Kenneth, it's been a fascinating conversation. I've learned a lot about the business. But before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Self-storage has come to Asia. Self-storage is not going to disappear from Asia. It's not a short-term trend or fad. It will continue growing. It will continue expanding. Operators like ourselves will continue to introduce the digital platforms. We will make it a lot more auto-friendly. We will be bringing new sort of segments to the self-storage industry because the demand is there.
Now, Kenneth, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Brian, thank you very much. I enjoyed that.
Now, take care to you.
Thanks,
too.
Bye-bye. Bye.
We've been speaking to Kenneth Worsdale. He's the CEO of Extra Space Asia. I'm Brian Fernandez, and you've been watching and listening to BizTech's CEO Conversation Show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.